Who is the limiting user in the design? Week 2, anthropometry. I'm going to talk about how we use anthropometry in design, and in that, there's always a limiting user. So let's talk about that. Okay, a limiting user, if you've seen in the intro, we introduced this concept. It's really a hypothetical individual, and we have to think it could be anyone, but we're looking for somebody who has an extreme body characteristic or is particularly difficult to accommodate. So it could be someone with a disability. That could be a limiting user if that is a target audience that we're designing for. In most cases for ergonomics, we would like it to be a healthy worker that may show up on our assembly line or in our manufacturing facility or at our workplace. So in that case, it would be the population, and we have to say who is extreme in that population. In most cases, then, it will be the smallest female that could arrive on that job, which would be our 5th female height, or that tallest male, and either from a height perspective that he can fit underneath and inside, or in particular his hand size, and that it could actually make connections and there's enough hand clearance there. So from a perspective then, we have to think, who is the limiting user? Who would be most limited by this design? So if the limiting user is accommodated, most of the population should be able to do it. So again, like if we did the biggest hand, then anybody with a small hand should be able to get their hand in there. And if we did it to the smallest height from a reach standpoint, then the tall person should be able to get it. Okay, now we just have to think about who our limiting user is and then what dimension is that limiting user. All right, so first question. This one's always a great one because it really makes sense. If you get this wrong, you're going to bump your head. All right, who do we design the door height for? Nobody should say average because that is the incorrect answer. We do not design for the average ever. So our audience is that everybody should be able to walk through a door. So our target audience is from the smallest to the very largest, basically the 1% to the 99%. So what we would do in this case, a lot of the tables will tell us those heights. So we would like to make sure that the tallest individual could fit through that door. And by the tallest individual then, we could then make sure that our small individual could go. So who is the limiting user? Whose size must we really consider in the design of the door height? So that's the question. Whose size must we really consider? And the answer is this tall individual, the 99th percentile. Now, most of our charts and everything we've said is about 95. If it doesn't cost any more, and in this case, we know that there are going to be 96 and 97 and even potentially a 99 percentile. So in this case, the designers have decided most standard doors fit up to a 99th percentile. So they're about 80 inches, which you'll find is in the higher percentile. And that's because it became a standard. So it really doesn't cost us any more to include that tall individual in the design. What anthropometric data is important? So for the door height, we don't usually walk through our doors with our hands above our head, so we don't need to know our reach height. We just don't want them to hit their head. So in this case, we think about how they're going to use the design. We know a door is a walk-through, so we're thinking head height for stature. If it's a reach for something, it may be a different anthropometry, it will be, than head height. It might be arm length. So again, you have to kind of back through and decide what is the anthropometric data that is important in your design. Okay, so we've got a design here. What risk factors do you see? Okay, it's only last week. We have force, frequency, and posture. Really hard to see if it's a frequency, but we should all see that there's a posture. So the height that this tote is being put at is questionable. I wonder what height it should be. So this is a design where we could use anthropometric data to decide what height would prevent this worker and all workers from bending. So think about that. What height would we want this shelf at to stop all workers from bending? We have to decide who is going to bend more. Is it going to be that tall person, or is it going to be the short person who would bend? The answer is it's the tall person that we're worried about. So we're looking at the tall person and his awkward back posture. So how could we design this so that the tall person did not have to bend when he was loading this part? So in this case, knowing the task is really important. We've been asked to decide what the height of the rack should be, but that is not the anthropometric data that we're going to be looking at. We are looking at, she would lift this with a handle here. You can see these cutouts. And in that handle height is actually the height that we need to understand and use in our anthropometric evaluation. So in order to stop a tall person from bending, we would want to make sure that this handle height is higher than his knee height or his knuckle height. And I say he because I'm going to design it for the 95th percentile male here to make sure that the 95th percentile male does not have to bend. So he's my limiting user. And I'm really interested in his knuckle height, which is my limiting dimension, because I'm going to make sure that the handle of this pallet, this tote, make sure that it is either at or above that knuckle height. Okay, that was a lot, so you may have to listen to that one again. But following along with the pictures, think about who is that extreme that we had to design for, understand what the task is, and then decide what dimension we're going to use from the anthropometric table to determine that height. So, what anthropometric measurement would you use? Would a tall person or a short person be affected by the height of this shelf? In theory, the short person's pretty good, right? It's much higher for them, but the tall person, if this is too low, they're the ones who are going to bend, and they're the ones then will end up with the back pain and issue. So we're going to use the tall person, our 95th male, as our limiting user. And then again, we want his arms to be about knuckle height. We want the tote handle to be knuckle height. So that's our limiting anthropometric measurement that we need so that we can design all around to that height. So now, I said here that there's a role that the short person has to play. We can't put this height so high that she's working overhead. So we're going to check it against the smallest person, the 5th percentile person's shoulder height. And this handle height then should end up between the knuckle height of the 95th percentile male and the shoulder height of the 5th percentile female. And here you have it then. When most of us make our guidelines, we know that we need to accommodate the extremes. So we give guidelines to the engineers that say no boxes above the shoulder height of this 5th percentile female, and no boxes or shelves below the knee height of the 95th percentile male. This is accommodating the range of operators that may end up on that job. So let's think about a different example, an access to a valve. Okay, so I'm thinking that I've got my hand, I've got to go in, and I've got to turn a valve, but maybe there's some blockage around there. I have to go maybe through a hole. How big should that hole be? I had this exact issue when we had to do some wiring inside the door, and the operator, the worker, had to put their hand through the access hole that was actually there for the speaker. So he put it through the speaker hole and made the clips on the inside of the vehicle. What size should that access hole be? So, who's our limiting user? Who's going to have the biggest hand? That's going to be the 95th percentile male. Hand size is what we're looking for. And we know that if we can design for them, that small little hand of the 5th percentile will be able to fit in there. So we go to our anthropometric tables, and in this case, we may want to, if they've got something in their hand, make sure we have enough width to get in, and we also then want to make sure we have the breadth. So our limiting user is the 95th percentile male hand, and our limiting dimension is probably hand breadth. So the target of the design, and this is often a question that you're asked because you're designing something. Who do you want to use your product? And in most cases, you want as many people as possible if you're selling your product, right? So in Ford's case, they really wanted to accommodate as many people as possible, at least over 16, that would be able to drive the vehicle. So the minute I said over 16, this means I can exclude all children's anthropometry as a driver, okay? We know that the children have to be in the vehicle, but that's another question. So you have to understand who your target audience is. So that's the word of target. Who do I want this design to be accommodating for? Most designs will exclude some people. In the kitchen, some of the counters, the refrigerator maybe even is too high for children. But yet you might want children to access some of those shelves, or you might want them to access some of those, the refrigerator. So you have to make some compromises and say, well, how low and where am I happy to exclude from? Because you don't really want maybe the little children to get that. Or you make some accommodation, like we talked about in the other video, of step stools and things like that for those that have that. But then there are special designed kitchens for, maybe for some disabilities, for wheelchair users and things like that. So then again, knowing then the heights of a seated person and what their reach capability is, and making sure all of our shelves are, in our design, are accommodating the height of someone sitting in a wheelchair. Okay? So you have to understand who you are not accommodating and make sure that that's okay. For the workplace, again, we're trying to make sure that we can employ whoever we're employing, which is usually an adult. So we're trying to accommodate that 5th percentile female all the way up to that 95th percentile male. And then we just have to look at the actions that they're doing to decide which parameter around those people that we need. Just to make you know that not all designs can accommodate everybody, and cost and functionality are usually the reason that they're not accommodated. So if you're trying to sell something and it just, to give it that range in diameter of a handle, or size to hold something, you just may not be able to, because it will cost so much more to add that feature to make it for the largest hand size or for the smallest height. So it becomes this kind of evaluation of cost and functionality. But again, usually in the workplace, we try really hard to accommodate that 5th percentile female all the way to the 95th percentile male.